The bathroom door swung open. Steam rolled into the hallway, thick and warm. The shower had stopped. Daniel froze. A woman's voice hummed softly from inside. A towel lay crumpled on the tile floor. That bathroom was supposed to be off limits to guests. For 6 months, it had been the only place he let himself breathe at the end of impossible days. His refuge. His ritual. Someone had crossed that invisible line. His hand hovered near the doorframe. He should leave. He should knock. He should say something. But before he could move, a radio crackled from the front desk downstairs. "Daniel, you there? We've got a guest checked in early. Main cottage." His chest tightened. If she walked out now and saw him, if she asked his name, if the front desk called him Mr. Ashford over the radio, everything would unravel. He stepped back silently. Turned. Walked away. Because tonight, he wasn't the owner. He was just the man who'd let a stranger take his last moment of peace. But how did we get here? Let me take you back. But before we do, if you believe the greatest blessings come when someone truly sees you, stay with me and hit that like button. Subscribe to Love and Light Stories for more journeys where genuine connection matters more than anything else. Now, let me take you back. 3 months earlier, Daniel stood at the edge of the coastal property watching the winter ocean. Cold bit through his jacket. Salt air burned his lungs. Waves crashed against black rocks 100 feet below. The inn behind him was silent except for the wind rattling loose shutters he'd been meaning to fix for weeks. He had inherited this place 8 months ago when his father died. A small cluster of cottages and a weathered main house perched on the Oregon coast. 18 rooms total. Most of them empty this time of year. It wasn't an empire. It wasn't impressive on paper. But it was real. Victoria had looked at the property once, smiled politely, and said nothing. 1 week before their wedding, she'd finally told him the truth. "I didn't agree to marry a small-town innkeeper, Daniel." She'd wanted the corporate legacy. Board meetings in Manhattan. Dinner parties with investors. A husband who looked successful in photographs. He'd wanted mornings like this. The sound of waves. Work he could see completed at the end of the day. Space to figure out who he was when no one was grading him. That was 8 months ago. He still woke some nights reaching for her side of the bed before remembering it had always been empty. Now he lived in the staff quarters and worked the property alone. He fixed leaking faucets at 2 in the morning. Repaired broken shutters. Answered emails from travelers looking for quiet. He introduced himself as Daniel, the property manager. Never mentioned the last name. Never corrected anyone who assumed he just worked there. Most days, it kept him functional. Most days, he could almost forget what it felt like to be measured and found lacking. But there were moments late at night when the house settled and the wind howled through gaps in the window frames when the question crept back in. If I'm not exceptional, what am I? He turned from the ocean and walked back toward the main office. Gravel crunched under his boots. A gutter hung loose on the north corner of the building. He'd fix it tomorrow. Or the day after. The list never got shorter. Inside, he checked the reservation system. 1 new booking. 3 months. Paid in full up front. Emma Clark. Travel photographer. Needed quiet for a book project. The note from the front desk said she'd requested the main cottage. The one farthest from the road. No neighbors. No distractions. He unlocked the cottage that afternoon and walked through each room checking for problems. Dust floated in weak winter light. He opened windows. Tested the heat. Ran water in the kitchen sink until it came clear. The guest bathroom was still taped off with yellow caution tape. A pipe had been leaking for months. He kept meaning to call a plumber. But that bathroom had become his at the end of long days when every muscle ached and his mind wouldn't stop. He'd stand under the hot water in that cracked tile shower and let everything wash off for 10 minutes. It was the only space on the entire property that felt like his. He told himself he'd fix the pipe before she arrived. Get it reopened for guests. He didn't. Instead, he checked the main bathroom, made sure the towels were clean, and locked the cottage behind him. That evening, he was replacing a broken porch light on the east cottages when his radio buzzed. "Daniel, you there?" He pressed the button. "Yeah." Guest called. "Wants to know if she can check in a day early. Tomorrow instead of Thursday." His hand tightened on the screwdriver. Tomorrow meant no time to fix the bathroom. Tomorrow meant she'd be there when he came back from his evening rounds. "That's fine," he said. "Cottage is ready." "Copy that." He finished replacing the light bulb and stood there for a moment watching the sun sink into the ocean. Orange light bled across the water. Seagulls screamed overhead. Somewhere behind him, a door slammed. The wind, probably. Or a guest he hadn't seen. He walked back to the office and sat at the desk staring at the reservation screen. Emma Clark. Photographer. 3 months. He opened her booking notes. She'd written a single line in the comments section. "Thank you for offering a quiet place. I really need this." He read it twice. Then closed the screen and locked the office. Tomorrow she'd arrive. Tomorrow the property would have someone new noticing things. Asking questions, maybe. He'd stay out of her way. Keep working. Keep his head down. It would be fine. He walked back to his quarters and lay in bed listening to the ocean. Sleep didn't come for hours. When it finally did, he dreamed of standing in front of Victoria wearing work clothes covered in paint and grease, trying to explain something she'd already stopped listening to. Emma arrived late afternoon when the sky had turned the color of old bruises. She pulled her Honda into the gravel lot and sat for a moment with the engine off, hands still gripping the steering wheel. 3 months. 1 book. Everything she had left. The coast stretched gray and infinite beyond the property. Wind shook her car. Rain threatened but hadn't started yet. She'd spent the last 18 months rebuilding her life one freelance assignment at a time. Editorial work that paid barely enough. Corporate headshots. A few weddings she'd hated shooting. This book was supposed to change that. A publisher had given her a small advance based on her proposal. Coastal solitude. Light and isolation. The beauty of forgotten places. If she finished it, she could pitch herself for better work. If the photos were good enough, she might actually make a living doing what she loved. If she didn't run out of money first. She grabbed her camera bag and suitcase and walked toward the main office. The building was old but well maintained. Fresh paint. New gutters. Someone cared about this place. The front desk was empty. A handwritten note sat on the counter beside a small lamp that had been left on even though it was still light outside. The handwriting was neat, precise. "Welcome, MS. Clark. Key is in the lockbox. Code 4729. Main cottage is ready. Let me know if you need anything. Daniel." She found the lockbox and retrieved the key. Walked the path to the cottage farthest from the road. Gravel crunched under her boots. The ocean roared somewhere beyond the cliffs. Everything smelled like salt and rain. The cottage was small but exactly what she'd hoped for. Wood floors worn smooth. A stone fireplace with kindling already stacked beside it. Windows overlooking the cliffs. She set her bags down and walked through each room, touching surfaces, testing doors, claiming the space. Kitchen. Bedroom with a quilt that looked handmade. A bathroom with a clawfoot tub. She noticed the yellow caution tape blocking a second bathroom down the hallway. A handwritten sign, "Closed for repairs. Please use main bath. Sorry for inconvenience." Fine. She didn't need 2 bathrooms. She turned the shower on in the main bathroom to test the water pressure. It ran hot and strong. Good. She hadn't realized how tense she'd been until her shoulders finally dropped. This could work. This place could be exactly what she needed. She unpacked slowly. Camera equipment first. 3 lenses arranged on the table. Laptop plugged in and charging. External hard drives stacked beside notebooks filled with location ideas and light studies. Then clothes. Sweaters. Jeans. Wool socks. One dress she probably wouldn't need. By evening, the cottage felt like hers. She made tea and stood at the window watching light fade over the ocean. The water turned from gray to silver to black. She should eat something. Should review her shot list for tomorrow. Should answer emails from the publisher asking for updates. Instead, she just stood there holding the warm mug and breathing. Tomorrow. She'd start tomorrow. She was rinsing the mug in the sink when she heard footsteps on the gravel outside. She glanced through the window and saw a man walking past carrying a toolbox. Tall. Dark jacket. He moved like someone who knew the property well. Not a guest. He stopped near the cottage and set the toolbox down. Pulled out a flashlight and examined something on the exterior wall. She couldn't see his face clearly in the dying light. Her phone buzzed. A text from the publisher. Checking in. How's the location? She typed back. Perfect. Starting tomorrow. When she looked up again, the man was gone. The toolbox was gone. Only fresh footprints in the gravel remained. She walked to the door and opened it, curious. The air was cold and damp. She looked left, then right. No one. But the porch light above her head was new. She could see where the old fixture had been removed. Fresh paint around the mounting bracket. Someone had just replaced it. She went back inside and locked the door. That night, she lay in bed listening to the wind rattle the windows. The cottage creaked and settled around her. She thought about the man with the toolbox. The handwritten note. The lamp left on at the front desk even though no one was there. The kindling stacked beside the fireplace. Small things. Details most property managers wouldn't bother with. She rolled over and closed her eyes. Tomorrow she'd explore. Tomorrow she'd shoot. Tomorrow she'd start building the body of work that would prove she could still do this. Tonight, she just needed to sleep. Daniel woke at 5:30 to his alarm, dressed in the dark, and started his morning rounds before the sun rose. He checked the main office first. Someone had left the porch light on overnight. He switched it off, then adjusted the thermostat, lowering it 2 degrees. Heating empty spaces wasted money. He walked the property in the pre-dawn cold, testing door locks, picking up trash the wind had scattered, making mental notes about shutters that needed tightening. The work kept his hands busy. Kept his thoughts from drifting to things he couldn't fix. When he reached the main cottage, he slowed. A light was on inside. She was awake. He didn't stop. She had paid for privacy. He intended to respect it. By the time he returned to the office, a pale gray light was spreading across the sky. He made coffee and sat at the desk reviewing the maintenance log. Gutter repair on the north building. Smoke detector batteries in cottage 3. A guest inquiry about March availability. Halfway through his second cup, he looked up and saw her. Through the window. She stood at the edge of the cliffs with her camera raised. Rain had just started, light and steady. She didn't move. Didn't rush. She stood there taking frame after frame, hair dark with moisture, jacket slowly soaking through. Most people ran inside when the rain came. She stayed. Daniel watched longer than he meant to. The way she adjusted the lens without looking. The way she waited, patient, as if the landscape would eventually reveal something only she could see. He turned back to his paperwork. An hour later, the rain had grown heavier. He was replacing batteries in cottage 3 when his radio crackled. The front desk asked about a request from the main cottage. Extra towels. Daniel answered that he would take care of it himself. He collected 2 clean towels from storage and walked toward the cottage. Rain drummed against his jacket. Mud clung to his boots. He knocked and waited. When the door opened, she stood there in dry clothes, her hair pulled back. Surprise crossed her face, then softened. "You're the property manager?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "Daniel." "I'm Emma." She hesitated, then added quietly, "This place is beautiful." "Thank you," he replied, holding out the towels. She took them, careful not to brush his hands. They stood there for a moment, listening to the rain. She mentioned she had been out earlier, caught in the weather. Said the light had been worth it anyway. Daniel nodded. He didn't know how to explain that he understood exactly what she meant. His radio crackled again, urgent this time. He lowered the volume instinctively. She noticed. "I won't keep you," she said gently. "Let me know if you need anything," he answered. She paused before closing the door. "You take good care of this place. It shows." The words stayed with him long after he walked away. That afternoon, he was repairing a fence near the storage shed when he saw her again. She was photographing the weathered siding of one of the empty cottages, moving slowly, deliberately, adjusting her angle until the light felt right. Daniel tried to focus on his work. Hammer. Nail. Wood. Still, he kept glancing up. After a while, she packed her camera and headed back toward her cottage. As she passed the main office, she stopped. Looked up. Reached out and switched off a porch light that had been left on during the day. Such a small thing. She didn't know he was watching. She just saw something unnecessary and fixed it. Daniel stood there holding the hammer, the fence forgotten. When was the last time someone had noticed something like that? He finished the repair in silence and returned to the office as the sun sank toward the water. He updated the maintenance log, replaced a thermostat, ordered filters, answered booking inquiries. Normal work. Normal day. And yet his thoughts kept circling back to that quiet moment. The turned-off light. The feeling that she saw details most people passed by. He locked the office and walked back to his quarters as darkness settled over the property. Tomorrow he would replace the gutters. Tomorrow he would call the plumber about the bathroom pipe he still hadn't fixed. Tomorrow he would try not to think about the photographer who noticed when lights were left on. Emma spent the next 5 days photographing the coast. She woke before dawn to catch the blue hour and stayed out until dusk, watching how light reshaped the water. She filled memory cards with tide pools, driftwood worn smooth by decades of waves, and fog clinging to the cliffs like something alive. The book was beginning to form in her mind. Not just landscapes, but solitude. The quiet beauty of things that endured without needing attention. She worked alone and preferred it that way. Still, she kept noticing Daniel. He was always working. Fixing something. Checking something. Moving through the property like it was an extension of his body. Early mornings, she saw him replacing boards on the dock. Midday, tightening a loose gate. Evenings, carrying tools back to the storage shed. He never seemed to stop. She noticed other things too. The way he turned off lights in empty buildings. How he adjusted thermostats in vacant cottages. The careful way he stacked firewood so it would dry properly. Small gestures. Things no one would notice unless they were paying attention. She was paying attention. On the 6th day, she realized she had been editing photos for hours without eating. Her stomach ached. Her eyes burned. She made herself a sandwich and coffee. Then, without thinking about it, poured a second cup. She found Daniel behind the main office, balanced on a ladder, replacing shingles. Late afternoon light cut across the building. Nails were tucked between his teeth, hammer steady in his hand. She called his name once, softly. He looked down, startled, then climbed down carefully. His shirt was damp with sweat despite the cold. There was a scrape across his knuckles she hadn't noticed before. She handed him the coffee and told him she thought he'd been up there too long. He told her she didn't have to do that. She said she knew. Their hands didn't touch when he took the cup, but came close enough that she noticed how rough his fingers were. Dust settled deep into the lines of his skin. He thanked her. Quietly. They stood there for a moment, listening to the ocean and the wind through the trees. She asked if he ever stopped working. He answered simply that he stopped when it got dark. She told him that didn't sound healthy. He smiled then, just a little. It was the first time she'd seen it. It softened his face, made him look younger. Less guarded. He drank the coffee slowly, like he wanted it to last. She asked how long he'd been there. He said 8 months. She said that wasn't very long. He answered that it was long enough. Something in his posture closed after that, and she didn't push. Before she left, she reminded him to eat something. He said he would. As she walked away, he stopped her once more, thanking her, not just for the coffee, but for noticing. She told him of course, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Walking back to her cottage, she felt a warmth spreading slowly through her chest, like cold water finally easing. That evening, she was downloading photos when a loud crash echoed outside. Metal against metal. Then silence. She pulled on her jacket and ran toward the sound. Behind the storage shed, Daniel was on the ground beside a collapsed shelving unit. Tools were scattered everywhere. A metal beam lay across his leg. She reached him quickly, asking if he was okay. He said he was fine, but his voice betrayed him. She helped move the beam aside. He stood slowly and winced. She told him he was hurt. He tried to brush it off. She didn't let him. She told him to sit, and something in the way she said it made him listen. She examined his leg. A deep bruise was already forming beneath the torn denim. No blood. Probably not broken. She told him he needed ice. He said he'd get it later. She said she'd be right back. Before he could argue, she was already walking toward her cottage. When she returned with ice wrapped in a towel, he was trying to stand again. She stopped him with a look this time. He sat. She pressed the ice gently against his leg. He flinched but didn't pull away. She told him to keep it there for 20 minutes. He commented that she sounded experienced. She told him she was a hiking accident years ago. He thanked her. She told him he didn't need to keep thanking her for basic decency. He said, almost to himself, that maybe he wasn't used to it. The words surprised them both. She didn't question him. Just adjusted the ice and told him she'd be back. When she returned 20 minutes later, she brought soup. He was still sitting exactly where she'd left him. She told him to eat. He did, slowly, like someone who had forgotten what hunger felt like. She sat nearby on an overturned bucket. They didn't talk. The silence felt easy. When he finished, he thanked her again, for everything. She told him he was welcome. He watched her for a long moment, like he was trying to understand something he hadn't expected to find. Eventually, he told her good night. She answered in kind and walked back to her cottage as darkness settled over the property. Inside, she washed the bowl and stood at the sink, staring out at nothing. She had only been there 6 days. But something was shifting. Something quiet. Careful. Like the beginning of something she didn't yet have a name for. 3 days passed. Marcus didn't return. But the tension he'd left behind lingered, heavy and unmoving. Daniel worked longer hours. Emma saw him before dawn replacing dock boards, at midday repairing a broken window, and again at dusk carrying supplies to empty cottages. He moved like someone trying to outrun a thought he didn't want to face. She wanted to ask if he was okay. Every time she got close, he found a reason to leave. A radio call. A repair that couldn't wait. So she gave him space and focused on her work. She photographed the abandoned lighthouse up the coast. Tide pools revealed only at low tide. Fog that turned familiar places into something otherworldly. Her hard drives filled quickly. The book was no longer an idea. It was becoming something real. On the 4th day, Marcus returned. Emma was loading equipment into her car when the black Mercedes pulled in. Marcus stepped out in another expensive suit, wearing the same sharp confidence. He walked past her as if she weren't there and went straight to the main office. 15 minutes later, he emerged with an older man carrying a clipboard. They walked the property together. Marcus pointing. The other man writing. When they stopped near her cottage, Marcus gestured dismissively at the weathered siding. This whole section should go, he said flatly. Luxury condos. Ocean views. They'd sell easily. Emma felt something tighten in her stomach. Daniel stood in the doorway of the office, listening. Marcus noticed her then and smiled thinly. He made a comment about how many photographs one book could possibly need. Emma opened her mouth to respond. Daniel stepped forward instead. He placed himself between them, his voice calm but firm. He told Marcus to stop. Marcus tried to brush it off as conversation. Daniel corrected him. Quietly. Precisely. He said Marcus wasn't being honest, he was being cruel. Marcus laughed and started listing what Emma wasn't. A photographer no one knew. A cottage that wasn't worth saving. A project that wouldn't matter. Daniel didn't raise his voice. He said Emma was creating something real. That she was documenting beauty others would destroy without a second thought. That she worked with dignity Marcus had never bothered to learn. The air went still. Marcus looked at him, surprised. Then annoyed. He accused Daniel of choosing a stranger over family. Daniel answered without hesitation. Marcus wasn't family. He was just Victoria's brother. That ended it. Marcus turned away, told the man with the clipboard they were finished, and left. For a moment, Daniel didn't move. Then his shoulders lowered slightly, like something had finally loosened. Emma approached him. She thanked him and said he hadn't needed to do that. Daniel told her he did. She warned him Marcus would cause problems. Daniel said Marcus had been trying for months already. She hesitated, then asked if what he'd said about her work was true. Daniel looked at her directly and said it was. That was enough. She had spent years trying to prove her work mattered. Daniel hadn't evaluated it. He'd seen it. They stood there as the afternoon light shifted. Daniel reached up and turned off the porch light that had been left on during the day. A small habit. A small care. Emma noticed. She asked why he worked the way he did. Why he treated the place like it was his. Daniel finished the thought for her. Because it was. She said his last name out loud, connecting what she'd heard before. Daniel didn't deny it. He told her he'd inherited the property after his father died. That he needed to know if he was capable of building something without hiding behind a title. He said he needed to know if he mattered when no one was watching. She told him he did. Without the title. Something in his expression gave way. He thanked her. They stood close, neither crossing the space between them. Not yet. Emma wished him good night and walked back to her cottage knowing something had shifted, not loudly, not suddenly, but in a way that couldn't be undone. Rain arrived that evening. Not the light coastal drizzle Emma had grown used to, but heavy sheets of water that drummed against the cottage roof and turned the gravel paths to mud. She sat by the window editing photos, watching lightning illuminate the cliffs in brief white flashes. Her phone buzzed. A text from the main office number. Power might go out. Flashlights in the kitchen drawer. Fireplace works if you need it. She texted back a quick thank you and found the flashlights. Then she built a fire, more for the comfort than the heat. The wood caught slowly. Smoke curled up the chimney. The cottage filled with the smell of burning cedar. She made tea and returned to her laptop. The screen glowed in the growing darkness. She was reviewing shots from the lighthouse when someone knocked. Daniel stood on her porch completely soaked. Rain poured off his jacket. His hair was plastered to his forehead. I was checking the cottages, he said. Making sure everyone has what they need before the power goes. I'm fine. Your text was helpful. He nodded. Started to turn away. Lightning cracked overhead. Thunder followed immediately. Too close. Do you want to wait it out? She asked. Until the worst passes? He hesitated. She could see him calculating. The distance back to his quarters. The rain. The lightning. Whatever internal rule he had about keeping distance from guests. Just for a few minutes, he said finally. She stepped back. He came inside, dripping water on the wood floor. She handed him a towel. Thank you, he said. He dried his face and hair. She poured a second cup of tea without asking and held it out. He took it, hands wrapped around the mug for warmth. They sat on opposite ends of the sofa. The fire crackled between the silence. Rain hammered the windows. The storm had turned the evening dark as midnight. Emma didn't push conversation. Just let the quiet settle. She'd learned over the past 2 weeks that Daniel spoke when he was ready, not when he was asked. He drank his tea slowly. Stared at the fire. His shoulders gradually dropped from their usual rigid line. I'm sorry about Marcus, he said finally. About what he said to you. You already apologized. And you already defended me. I know. But I keep thinking about it. About how he looked at you. Like you didn't matter. People have looked at me that way before. He glanced at her. That doesn't make it right. No. But it makes it familiar. The fire popped. Sparks drifted up. Outside, the wind had picked up. It howled around the cottage corners. Daniel set his empty mug on the table. His hands were still shaking slightly. From the cold, she thought at first. Then she realized it was something else. Victoria used to look at me that way, he said quietly. Toward the end. Emma went very still. She'd wondered about Victoria ever since Marcus mentioned her name. But she hadn't asked. Hadn't wanted to push. Now Daniel was offering it freely. We were engaged, he continued. His voice was measured. Careful. Like he was reading from a script he'd memorized. 8 months ago. 1 week before the wedding, she told me she couldn't do it. Couldn't marry someone who wanted to run a small coastal inn instead of the corporate holdings my father had built. Rain streaked down the windows. The fire cast moving shadows across his face. She said I was wasting my potential. That I was choosing to be ordinary when I could be exceptional. That she'd agreed to marry someone impressive and I'd turned into someone forgettable. The words came out flat. Too flat. Like he'd repeated them so many times they'd lost all feeling. Emma didn't interrupt. Didn't offer sympathy. She just listened. The worst part wasn't that she left, Daniel said. The worst part was that I believed her. I stood there in my father's office wearing a suit that cost more than most people make in a month and I believed that without the title, without the empire, I was nothing. He finally looked at Emma. His eyes reflected firelight. So I came here. Told everyone I was taking time off. Filed the paperwork under the company name so no one would know the owner was actually working the property. I wanted to see if I could do something that mattered when nobody was watching. When nobody was impressed. Thunder rolled in the distance. The storm was moving away. But neither of them moved. And, Emma asked gently, most days I still don't know. I fix things. I work. I keep the property running. But I don't know if it matters. If I matter. She understood that uncertainty. Had lived with it for months after her own relationship ended. After galleries rejected her work. After editors called her vision too quiet to sell. It matters, she said. What you're doing here. The way you care about details no one else would notice. That matters. He shook his head slightly. You don't have to, I'm not saying it to be kind. I'm saying it because it's true. He studied her face. Looking for pity, maybe. Or doubt. He wouldn't find either. Thank you, he said finally. The rain had softened to a steady rhythm. The fire was burning low. Daniel stood slowly, testing his weight like he'd forgotten how to move. I should go, he said. Storms passed. Okay. He walked to the door. Paused with his hand on the knob. Turned back. Emma? Yes? What you said earlier. About people looking at you like you don't matter. They're wrong. Her throat tightened. She managed to nod. He left quietly. The door clicked shut behind him. She sat by the dying fire for a long time after he was gone. Outside, rain continued its gentle drumming. The cottage creaked and settled. She thought about the way Daniel had looked when he talked about Victoria. The careful flatness in his voice. The way his hands had shaken. She thought about her own ex. The photographer who'd told her she needed to shoot what sold instead of what mattered. Who'd looked at her work and called it pretty but pointless. Who'd made her feel small for caring about light and silence in moments no one else noticed. She'd left. Started over. Come here to prove she could create something real. Daniel had done the same thing. Left everything to prove his worth wasn't tied to a name on a building. They were both trying to matter without needing to be impressive. She stood and banked the fire. Turned off the lamp. Lay in bed listening to the last of the rain fade into silence. Tomorrow she'd edit more photos. Tomorrow she'd keep building her book. Tomorrow she'd pretend she didn't notice the way her chest felt different when Daniel was near. Tonight she just lay in the dark and thought about the loneliness in his voice when he'd said he believed he was nothing. And she understood completely. 2 days later, Emma was photographing the dock at sunrise when she heard voices carrying across the water. Sharp voices. Angry. She lowered her camera and looked toward the main office. Daniel stood outside talking to Marcus. Or rather, Marcus was talking at him. Even from a distance, she could see the rigid line of Daniel's shoulders. She should leave. Should give them privacy. But something in the tone made her pause. Marcus's voice rose. Loud enough now that individual words reached her across the morning stillness. Playing maintenance man. That's your legacy now. Father would be ashamed. Emma's hands tightened on her camera. Daniel said something too quiet to hear. Marcus laughed. The sound was cruel. You think this matters? You think hiding here changes anything? You're still the man Victoria didn't want. Still the heir who walked away from everything real to play pretend. Emma started walking toward them before she decided to move. Daniel saw her first. His face went carefully blank. Marcus turned, following his gaze. The photographer, Marcus said. His smile was sharp. Come to document more decay? I came to tell Daniel the dock railing is loose, she said evenly. Safety issue. It wasn't true. The dock was fine. But her voice didn't waver. Marcus looked between them. Something knowing crossed his face. Of course. The property manager needs to fix things. That's what he does now. Fixes broken railings and pretends it's meaningful work. Emma stepped closer. Close enough to see the tension in Daniel's jaw. Close enough to feel the weight of whatever Marcus had been saying before she arrived. He maintains a property that brings people peace, she said quietly. That takes skill and dedication most people don't have. Including you. Marcus's smile faded. You've been here what, 3 weeks? You don't know anything about him. About what he gave up. What he's running from. I know he shows up every day and does work that matters. I know he cares about details no one else would notice. I know he treats people with more respect than you've shown in every conversation I've witnessed. The silence that followed felt thick. Heavy. Marcus stared at her. Then at Daniel. Then back to her. Interesting, he said softly. The artist and the dropout. both hiding from real life, both pretending their little projects matter. He walked to his car, paused before getting in. Offer still stands, Daniel. Real buyers. Real money. Real purpose. Or you can keep playing caretaker with your new friend and see where that gets you. He drove away. Gravel sprayed. The sound of the engine faded. Daniel stood motionless for a long moment. Then he turned to Emma. You didn't have to do that, he said. Yes, I did. He'll use it against me. Against both of us. I don't care. He looked at her like he was trying to understand something. Like he was seeing her clearly for the first time. Thank you, he said quietly. You're welcome. They stood in the morning light. The ocean sound filled the space between words. Seagulls cried overhead. Wind moved through the trees. The dock railing isn't actually loose, is it? He asked. No. A small smile touched his face. Barely there. But real. I should check it anyway, he said. Probably. He walked toward the dock. She watched him go. Watched the way he moved. Steadier now than he'd been 5 minutes ago. She returned to her cottage and tried to work. But her hands were shaking. Not from fear. From something else. Something that felt like anger mixed with protectiveness mixed with the sudden fierce certainty that Daniel Ashford mattered more than Marcus would ever understand. She defended him. Publicly. Without hesitation. And she'd meant every word. That evening, she found a note slipped under her cottage door. Thank you. For seeing what most people miss. She held the note for a long time. Read it twice. Then placed it carefully between the pages of her notebook. Outside, the sun was setting over the ocean. Golden light spread across the water. She thought about the way Daniel's face had changed when she'd defended him. The surprise. The gratitude. The way something had shifted between them that couldn't be unshifted. She was falling. Slowly. Carefully. Inevitably. And she suspected he was too. The weather turned cold that week. Wind came off the ocean carrying the smell of winter. Emma wore layers and kept the fireplace burning. Her fingers went numb when she photographed too long outside. She was reviewing shots one afternoon when her laptop screen flickered. Then went black. She tried restarting it. Nothing. The power button clicked uselessly under her thumb. Her chest tightened. 3 weeks of work. Hundreds of photos. The entire book project lived on that machine. She had backups. She reminded herself of that. External hard drives. Cloud storage. But the panic didn't care about logic. She grabbed her jacket and walked quickly to the main office. Daniel was at the desk reviewing paperwork. My laptop died, she said. Her voice came out higher than intended. It just went black. Won't turn on. He stood immediately. Did you back everything up? Yes. But I need it working. I can't edit on my phone. Can't meet my deadline without, let me see it. She led him back to the cottage. He examined the laptop carefully. Tried the power button. Checked the charging cable. Unscrewed the back panel with a small toolkit he'd pulled from his jacket pocket. She paced the kitchen. 3 steps one way. 3 steps back. Her hands wouldn't stay still. How long has the battery been acting up? He asked. Battery? It's been fine. He pointed to a small indicator inside the open panel. This connection is loose. Probably from moving it around. Battery's fine but it can't charge properly. Can you fix it? Maybe. I need a smaller screwdriver. He left and returned 10 minutes later with different tools. She stood behind him watching his hands work. Steady. Precise. He tightened something. Tested the connection. Closed the panel. Try it now, he said. She pressed the power button. The screen flickered. Then glowed to life. Relief hit her so hard she had to sit down. Thank you, she said. Her voice shook slightly. Thank you so much. It's just a loose connection. It's 3 weeks of work. It's my entire book. She stopped. Took a breath. Her hands were trembling. Daniel set the laptop on the table and crouched in front of her chair. I level now. Emma. Breathe. She breathed. Once. Twice. The panic slowly receded. I'm sorry, she said. This book is everything. If I can't finish it, if the photos aren't good enough, I don't know what I'll do next. I've put everything I have into this. He didn't tell her it would be fine. Didn't offer empty reassurance. Just listened. I understand, he said quietly. Putting everything into something that might not work. Needing it to matter. She looked at him. Really looked. Saw the exhaustion in his face. The weight he carried. They were both building something from nothing. Both terrified it wouldn't be enough. Yeah, she said. You do understand. He stood slowly. Gathered his tools. Your work is good, Emma. Better than good. I've seen some of your photos when you leave your camera on the table. The way you capture light. The way you see things. That matters. Marcus returned on a gray morning when fog had rolled in thick from the ocean. Emma was loading camera equipment into her car when his Mercedes pulled into the lot. He climbed out holding a manila folder. MS. Clark, he said. His voice was pleasant. Too pleasant. Do you have a moment? Every instinct told her to say no. But curiosity won. What do you want? He opened the folder and held out several printed pages. Property listings. Development plans. Financial projections. I thought you should see these, he said. Before you get too attached. She took the papers. Scanned them. Her stomach dropped. Ashford Properties LLC. Development proposal. Timeline, 6 months. Cottages to be demolished and replaced with luxury condos. Projected profit, $18 million. The proposal was dated 3 weeks ago. Right before she'd arrived. I don't understand, she said. Daniel's been working on this sale for months. He hired a management company to run the property temporarily while he finalized the deal. Made it look operational. Lived here himself to keep up appearances. Very convincing. The words felt like stones sinking into cold water. He told you he inherited the place and wanted to make it matter, didn't he? Marcus continued. Told you he was trying to prove his worth without a title? That's partially true. But what he didn't mention is that he's been preparing to sell it the entire time. This was never about preservation. It was about maximizing property value before finding the right buyer. Emma's hands tightened on the papers. Why are you telling me this? Because you defended him. Because you clearly care about him. And because I think you deserve to know that the man you're falling for has been planning to destroy everything you've been photographing. He got back in his car. Drove away before she could respond. She stood in the parking lot holding the papers. Fog pressed in around her. The ocean sound was muffled and distant. 3 weeks of photographing a place that was scheduled for demolition. 3 weeks of believing Daniel when he said this place mattered. 3 weeks of falling for someone who'd been lying the entire time. She walked to the main office. Daniel was at the desk reviewing invoices. Can we talk? She asked. He looked up. Smiled slightly. Then saw her face and the smile faded. What's wrong? She set the papers on the desk between them. He looked down. His expression went completely still. Marcus gave you these, he said. Not a question. Are they real? Silence stretched. Too long. Daniel. Are they real? It's complicated. That's not an answer. He stood. Ran a hand through his hair. Those plans existed. 6 months ago. Before I'd actually lived here. Before I understood what this place was. But you never canceled them. I meant to. There were other priorities. I kept putting it off. She stared at him. At the man who'd fixed her laptop. Who'd defended her to Marcus. Who'd told her the work she was doing mattered. Were you ever going to tell me? She asked quietly. There was nothing to tell. Those plans are outdated. I'm not selling. But you were. That's the point. You spent months preparing to destroy this place for profit while telling me it mattered. While watching me photograph buildings you plan to demolish. That's not fair. Isn't it? His jaw tightened. You don't understand. Then explain it to me. He opened his mouth. Closed it. The silence was answer enough. Emma picked up the papers. Folded them carefully. Her hands were steady but her chest felt hollow. I came here to document something real, she said. Something that endured. I thought I found that. I thought I found someone who understood why that mattered. Emma, I need some space. To think. She walked out before he could respond. Back in the cottage, she sat at the table staring at her laptop. At photos of buildings that might not exist in 6 months. Of a place that might have been alive from the beginning. She wanted to be angry. Anger would be easier. Instead, she just felt tired. And foolish for believing. 3 days passed. Emma avoided the main office. Avoided the paths where she might see Daniel. She photographed mechanically. Going through motions. Her heart wasn't in it anymore. She saw him once from a distance. He was replacing a broken fence post near the storage shed. Moving slowly. Like someone going through motions too. She turned and walked the other direction. On the 4th day, she received an email from her publisher. Need to see progress. Can you send sample chapters and photos by end of week? She stared at the screen. End of week was 3 days away. She had the photos. But she couldn't write about this place anymore. Couldn't write about beauty and endurance when the whole thing might be temporary. Might have been staged. She closed the laptop and lay on the bed staring at the ceiling. Outside, rain started. Light at first. Then heavier. It drummed against the roof. Filled the silence. She thought about the way Daniel had looked when Marcus showed up. The weight in his shoulders. The way he'd said he needed to prove his worth. She thought about the development plans. Dated 6 months ago. Before he'd lived here. Before he'd understood. Maybe he'd been telling the truth. Maybe the plans really were outdated. Or maybe she was making excuses for someone who'd lied by omission. She didn't know anymore. Rain continued into evening. Into night. She lay in the dark listening to water pour off the eaves. Listening to the ocean roar in the distance. Tomorrow she'd have to decide. Finish the book about a place that might not survive. Or walk away from 3 weeks of work and start over somewhere else. Tomorrow she'd have to figure out if Daniel had been honest or if she'd been foolishly naive. Tonight she just lay in the dark and felt the weight of not knowing. Emma woke on the 5th day to voices outside her cottage. She glanced at the clock. 7 in the morning. Too early for guests. She pulled on a sweater and looked through the window. 3 people in business suits stood in the parking lot with Daniel. One held a clipboard. Another was photographing the buildings. The third was pointing at the cottages and talking animatedly. Marcus stood beside them. Smiling. Emma's chest tightened. She watched Daniel nod at something the clipboard man said. Watched him gesture toward the main office. Watched the group walk that direction together. 20 minutes later, they emerged. Shook hands. The business suits climbed into a dark SUV and drove away. Marcus lingered. Said something to Daniel she couldn't hear from this distance. Patted his shoulder. Got in his Mercedes and left. Daniel stood alone in the parking lot for a long moment. Then walked toward the storage shed. Emma stepped back from the window. Her hands were shaking. Buyers. He'd met with actual buyers. She grabbed her phone and opened her email. Started typing. Something came up. Need to leave earlier than planned. Will forfeit remaining rent. Sorry for short notice. Her finger hovered over send. She thought about the photos on her hard drive. 3 weeks of work. The book half finished. The deadline 3 days away. She thought about Daniel fixing her laptop. Defending her to Marcus. Telling her the work she did mattered. She thought about development plans and buyers in suits and Marcus's knowing smile. She pressed send. Packing took 2 hours. Camera equipment first. Lenses wrapped carefully. Hard drives secured in padded cases. Then clothes. Books. The few belongings that had made the cottage feel temporarily like home. She was loading the last box into her car when Daniel appeared. You're leaving, he said. Yes. Because of what Marcus told you. Because of what I saw this morning. The buyers. The handshakes. The way Marcus looked like he'd won something. Daniel's face went pale. That wasn't what? Wasn't you selling the property? Because it looked exactly like that. They weren't buyers. They were inspectors. The county requires, don't lie to me, Daniel. Please. Just don't. He stopped. Jaw tight. Hands clenched at his sides. You don't understand the full situation, he said quietly. Then explain it. I can't. Not yet. There are legal complications. Things I'm trying to fix. But I need you to trust me. She looked at him. At the exhaustion in his face. The desperation barely hidden beneath careful control. I want to trust you, she said. But you've given me every reason not to. Development plans you never canceled. Buyers showing up. Marcus acting like he's already won. What am I supposed to think? That I'm trying. That I'm fighting for this place. That everything I told you is true. Was it? Was any of it true? Or was I just convenient? Someone to make the property look operational while you finalized the sale. The words came out harsher than she'd intended. But she didn't take them back. Daniel flinched like she'd struck him. If that's what you think of me, he said quietly, then maybe you should go. The silence between them felt physical. Heavy enough to crush. Emma closed her car trunk. I have a deadline. I need to finish this book somewhere I can actually focus. Of course. I understand. But his voice said he didn't understand. Said she'd just confirmed something he'd always believed about himself. That when it mattered, he wasn't worth staying for. She got in her car. Started the engine. He stepped back. She wanted to say something. Wanted to apologize for the harshness. Wanted to ask him to fight harder to explain. But she just put the car in drive and pulled away. In the rearview mirror, she saw him standing alone in the parking lot. Hands in his pockets. Shoulders curved inward like he was trying to make himself smaller. She made it 3 miles before she had to pull over. Her hands were shaking too hard to drive safely. She sat on the shoulder of the coastal highway crying. Not pretty crying. Ugly sobbing that came from somewhere deep and raw. She'd fallen for him. Completely. Stupidly. Despite every warning sign. And she'd just walked away because she was too scared to believe someone might actually be worth the risk. Daniel stood in the empty parking lot long after Emma's car disappeared. The ocean roared. Seagulls cried. Wind rattled loose shutters he'd never gotten around to fixing. He'd lost her. She'd looked at him like he was exactly what Victoria had called him. A disappointment. Someone who broke promises. Someone not worth fighting for. The worst part was understanding why. The development plans he'd never officially canceled. The county inspectors Marcus had deliberately scheduled to look like buyers. The legal complications he couldn't explain without revealing things that weren't his to share yet. From the outside, it looked exactly like betrayal. He walked to the main office and sat at the desk. Stared at the computer screen without seeing it. He'd spent 8 months trying to prove his worth. Trying to show that who he was mattered more than what he owned. And the one person who'd actually seen him, who'd defended him, who'd made him believe maybe he wasn't nothing without a title, had just driven away believing he'd lied to her. Maybe Victoria had been right. Maybe he really was someone people left. Emma checked into a motel 30 miles up the coast. Gray walls. Thin curtains. The smell of old carpet and industrial cleaner. She set up her laptop on the scratch desk and tried to work. The photos stared back at her. The weathered cottages. The dock where she'd photographed sunrise. The storage shed where Daniel had fallen and she'd brought him ice and soup. Every image reminded her of what she'd left behind. She opened a new document and tried to write. The publisher needed text to accompany the photos. Needed her perspective on coastal isolation and beauty that endured. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. She had nothing to say. How could she write about endurance when she'd run at the first sign of difficulty? How could she write about beauty that lasted when she'd walked away from the most real thing she'd found in years? She closed the laptop and lay on the scratchy motel bedspread staring at the stained ceiling. Tomorrow she'd try again. Tomorrow she'd find words. Tonight she just lay in the dark, missing the sound of the ocean. Missing the cottage with its stone fireplace. Missing the way Daniel said her name. Missing everything she'd been too afraid to fight for. 2 days passed in the motel. Emma tried to work. Failed. Tried to sleep. Failed at that too. The photos haunted her. Every image of the property. Every shot of light breaking through coastal fog. She'd been documenting something real. She knew that in her bones. But she'd walked away before understanding the full truth. On the 3rd morning, someone knocked on her motel door. She opened it. Daniel stood in the hallway looking like he hadn't slept. His eyes were shadowed. His jacket wrinkled. He held a folder in his hands. How did you find me? She asked. You paid with a card. Transaction showed the motel name. I hope that's not. I shouldn't have. But I needed to show you something. He held out the folder. She took it. Opened it slowly. Legal documents. County inspection reports. And a letter dated 2 weeks ago on official letterwork. She read carefully. Then read again. The inspectors hadn't been buyers. They'd been county officials Marcus had bribed to threaten condemnation if Daniel didn't sell. Marcus had been systematically sabotaging the property, falsifying maintenance records, reporting violations that didn't exist, all to force Daniel's hand. The development plans Emma had seen were real, but they were Marcus's plans, not Daniel's. Filed under Ashford Properties without Daniel's knowledge while he'd been grieving his father, Daniel had spent 8 months trying to prove the property was sound, fixing everything Marcus had deliberately broken, fighting legal battles he couldn't discuss because they were still in process. I couldn't tell you, Daniel said quietly. My lawyer said any public discussion could compromise the case. Marcus was watching, listening, waiting for me to make a mistake that would give him leverage. Emma's hands shook holding the papers. The people you saw weren't buyers. They were the final inspection, confirming that every violation Marcus reported was fraudulent. The case closes next week. Marcus loses all claim to the property. It's done. She looked up at him. Why didn't you tell me before? I tried. But I couldn't explain without showing you documents that were sealed. And by the time I could, you were already gone. Silence filled the motel hallway. Someone's television played faintly through thin walls. I'm sorry, she said. I should have trusted you. Should have let you explain. You had every reason not to. I kept secrets. I let you believe things that weren't true. I understand why you left. No. I left because I was scared. Because everyone I've ever trusted has looked at my work and called it not enough. And when I thought you were doing the same, thought you'd been lying about this place mattering, I ran instead of fighting for something real. He stepped closer. Just one step. Not invading her space. Just closing the distance slightly. Your work matters, Emma. The book you're making matters. You matter. Not because of what you produce or how impressive you are. You matter because of who you are when you're photographing light that no one else notices. When you're turning off lights to save energy. When you're bringing coffee to someone who works too hard. That's who you are. And that's more than enough. Her throat burned. Tears blurred her vision. I think I've been in love with you for a while now, he said quietly. I tried not to. I tried to keep my distance, because it felt wrong to feel this much after such a short time. But I do. I love you for exactly who you are, for the way you see beauty everyone else misses, for your stubbornness, your kindness, and the way you defend people who are worth defending. The words broke something open in her chest. I love you too, she whispered. I think I started falling the day you fixed my laptop. When you told me my work mattered. When I watched you care about details no one else would ever notice. Can I? He started. Yes. He closed the distance between them. His hand cupped her face gently, thumb brushing her cheek. She leaned into his touch. When he kissed her, it was soft. Careful. Like he was afraid she might disappear. She kissed him back with everything she'd been holding back for weeks. All the fear and hope and longing. They stood in the dingy motel hallway and the rest of the world fell away. When they finally pulled apart, she was crying. So was he. Come back, he said. Please. Finish your book. Let me show you what the property can become. What we can become. Yes, she said. Yes to all of it. He held her while she cried. While the relief and joy and terror of trusting someone washed through her. I'm sorry I ran, she whispered against his chest. I'm sorry I couldn't explain sooner. We're both stubborn idiots. She felt him smile against her hair. In the best way. Emma returned to the coastal property that afternoon. Daniel helped her unpack. They worked in comfortable silence, carrying boxes from her car to the cottage. She finished her book over the next 6 weeks. Photographed the property in spring light. Wrote about endurance and quiet beauty in places that mattered because someone chose to see them. The publisher accepted it immediately. Marcus's legal claim was dismissed. He disappeared from their lives as quickly as he tried to destroy them. The property thrived. Guests came seeking peace. Found it in cottages maintained with care. In gardens Daniel planted. In the kind of beauty that existed because someone loved it enough to protect it. Emma and Daniel fell into a rhythm. Morning coffee on the dock. Evenings by the fire. Work that mattered. Love that grew slowly and surely like roots finding soil. They didn't rush. Didn't need to. They had time. 2 years later, Emma woke in the main house they now shared. Sunlight streamed through windows. Daniel had restored himself. The ocean roared in the distance. She found him in the kitchen making coffee. He handed her a cup without asking. Kissed her forehead. "I need to fix something in the guest cottage," he said. "Want to come?" "Always." They walked the property together. The gardens were lush now. Roses bloomed along stone walls. The cottages gleamed with fresh paint. Everything spoke of care and time and hands that worked with love. Daniel unlocked the main cottage. Led her down the hallway to the bathroom that had started everything. The one that had been off limits. The one she'd used that first night without knowing it was his refuge. He'd transformed it. White subway tiles. Brass fixtures. A clawfoot tub. White towels hung on polished hooks. Red flowers in a simple vase. "It's beautiful," she said. "I wanted to show you something." He knelt on the white tile floor. Pulled a small red velvet box from his jacket pocket. Her breath caught. "This is where it started," he said quietly. "Where you crossed a line I'd drawn to keep everyone out. Where I realized someone could see me hiding and choose to stay anyway." He opened the box. A simple ring. Delicate. Exactly right. "I've spent 2 years learning that love isn't about being impressive. It's about being seen. Really seen. And choosing each other anyway. Every day. Even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." Tears blurred her vision. "Emma Clark. Will you marry me?" "Yes," she whispered. "Yes." He slid the ring on her finger. Stood. Held her while she cried happy tears against his chest. Through the bathroom window, morning light painted everything gold. The ocean. The cliffs. The property they'd built together. The life they'd chosen. 6 months later, they married in the garden Daniel had planted. Small ceremony. Close friends. Her parents. His mother. Emma wore a simple dress. Carried wildflowers. Married the man who'd taught her that matching had nothing to do with being exceptional. They honeymooned at the property. Walked the cliffs. Photographed light. Made plans for the future. Her book won an award. Small press recognition. Not famous. But real. Daniel expanded the property slowly. Hired staff. Taught them to care about details. To turn off lights. To notice when guests needed something before they asked. They built a life measured not in achievements but in moments. Morning coffee. Shared work. The quiet satisfaction of creating something that endured. Some people believe love is found in grand gestures. In perfection. In being impressive enough to earn devotion. But the deepest love grows in small moments. In coffee brought without asking. In lights turned off because someone notices. In two people who choose to see each other's worth when the world stops watching. Daniel learned he mattered not because of what he inherited, but because of what he protected. Emma learned her vision was enough exactly as it was. And together they built something that lasted. Not because it was extraordinary, but because it was real. If you stayed until the end, thank you for being here with me. This channel grows because of listeners like you, so if this story meant something to you, I invite you to subscribe. I'd love to know how it touched you. From 0 to 10, how did it make you feel? Leave your number in the comments, I truly read them all. And if you'd like, tell me where you're listening from. Thank you for sharing this moment with me. I'll see you in the next story.